Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Proper. This is Dev Diary number 24, Navies and Admirals. This one was written by Lacek, thank you Lacek. This is a very interesting Dev Diary. I do also think it's a very inoffensive, uncontroversial Dev Diary, because what we have here, in my opinion, is a very natural evolution of the previous systems. You know, you had Victoria 2, EU3, where everything was micro when it comes to the Navy. Then you had EU4 and Hearts of Iron 4, and they recognized that navies aren't just at sea to be at sea, right? And then coincidentally a mission happens or a battle happens. No, they are at sea to go through with certain missions. We have this in EU4, there are various missions, there are various settings that you can have, and we have this in Hearts of Iron 4 with the area-based missions as well. This is basically what we have right here. It's a direct evolution. The big questions, of course, for this naval system, basically they are, does it matter for war? Is this important for the well-being of my state, of my colonial empire? And the other one is, I think, are they risky enough to maintain? What do I mean by that? I mean that building a ship and losing a ship, you know, building a ship takes ages, losing a ship can take a couple of minutes. So the way I see it is basically that those are the big two factors. It needs to be very expensive, but it also needs to be a necessity, as it was in this era. So let's take a look at this and how it goes. Today we talk about navies and how we intend to make them as strategically important to winning wars as they were in history. This is the era of truly global trade. This also meant countries were highly susceptible to disruption of that trade, and the higher they climb, the harder they may fall. This is something that, since Paradox games commonly, except CK3 now, but since Paradox games commonly had Navy units on their separate thing, people misunderstand that a lot. I misunderstood it for such a long time until I actually looked it up. But for a long period in human history, having a Navy just kind of wasn't a requirement. The kings of England in the medieval period, they had a Navy for like 10 years, and then the king that built that Navy died. But it's not an institution if it lasts just for one leader, right? An institution lasts over generations. And they didn't have a navy because there wasn't a reason for it, you know? To defend against, for example, invaders, what you do is you have a network of towers. That is effectively what they did in England as well. What they did in Iberia, under the Umayyads, for example. You have a network of towers that alerts, you know, land forces that they need to go in. Alerts maybe a squadron of like 3 boats or whatever to lock in the invaders, but you don't immediately meet them on the field, by which I mean on the sea, right? So basically navies didn't play a big role until here, until the discovery of the Americas, for example. All that created this huge need, because all of a sudden you had huge overseas prosperity that you needed to bring over into your country to maintain and sustain this empire. So navies here play an incredibly, incredibly important role, and that must be reflected indeed. Blue Water Navy is a large but necessary expense if you wish to ensure the integrity of your markets, overseas colonies, and trade routes during war. That's exactly what it needs to be. I do want to mention that brown water navies, as per the devs, from what we know so far, will not be a thing. They have thought about it, they would like to have it, and it would be cool, in particular with the American Civil War in mind, where it played a big, big role when it came to the campaign, you know, of the Mississippi, but not in the game. So if you're looking for that, that's not going to be in here. They also give you a lot of prestige, by the way, but we already saw that in the monthly update. The Navy and naval operations should serve as a strategic precision instrument in conflicts between seafaring nations. The sea is not another front in a war. The province-based moving front system works well to represent conflicts over territory, but would be nonsensical at sea, where no nation can be said to meaningfully control an enormous stretch of ocean. Instead, admirals and their flotillas are deployed to meet specific strategic objectives, to disrupt the enemy's military operations or economy, or defend against such attempts by the enemy. You will see this later on as well. But this game, except for Hearts of Iron 4. In Hearts of Iron 4, they do know it, and in Hearts of Iron 4, you can still micro into active battles, but in Hearts of Iron 4, basically it is area-based, right? Every other game usually gets it wrong, where you're looking at a situation where I'm in a sea tile, an enemy enters the sea tile, and we go, wait a minute, that is my sea tile, we will fight. That's nonsense. That's really, yeah, that's just not how any of that worked. And the other section, of course, is that we're looking at something where navies leave the harbor. Navies leave their base to do something. Navies don't just hang around. Protecting convoys, that is something to do. Raiding convoys, that is something to do. Navies aren't just somewhere. Blockading someone, for example, that is something to do. Don't get me wrong here. But where I'm coming from is fundamentally the idea that navies operate under the idea of missions. They must achieve something because Navy missions are expensive, Navy missions are difficult, but that is what they do. And that is exactly the design philosophy that they have here. And let's take a look at this. This is Luanda. We have Ambris right here. This is Angola. This is a Portuguese transporter that goes towards the market center of Portugal because, of course, this is basically the supply network. This is how they supply Luanda and vice versa and connect it to the market capital. Now, as with land warfare in general, you control your navy through your admirals. Let's keep all of this in mind. To understand the system, even though they don't post too many screenshots of this, but we can fully understand the system if we think about the land warfare system. Generals and admirals share many similarities. Both are provided with military resources originating from buildings in the strategic region they call home. I have a naval base. Naval base creates ships. Ships are then assigned to admiral in the strategic region that the naval base is in. That is how it works, because that is how battalions and how generals work. The amount of resources they get depend on their rank, much like generals, which you can grant via promotions to reward your favorite commanders. Their rank also lends political strength, clout to the character's favorite interest group. Furthermore, both generals and admirals get traits that affect both themselves and those officers and servicemen serving underneath them. This is a very important one. I said this about generals, and I mean this about the Navy as well. We need generals and commanders in general to be more than number modifiers. We need them to be commanders. If I give the mission of patrolling and they engage in a battle, I want commanders, depending on what, theory, what thought, what doctrine they believe in, whether they are good with the ship types that they have, what ship types they have, etc. I want them to make decisions that are far further, that are further than them just saying, I give a 5% bonus. I need them to do more. I've made that clear as well. I would like, of course, a naval academy as well. We have very, very, very important cases in this period when it comes to naval tradition, to naval doctrines. We have, of course, I believe it's pronounced Mahan. Mahan, who was a US, naval expert, you could say, who is basically the most influential, or one of the most influential people when it comes to naval doctrines. In this period, he came up with the idea of decisive battles, not for the sake of having a decisive battle, but for the sake of saying, we have this battle, and then we can go through with our missions. We can intercept convoys, we can convoy raid, we can naval invade, that sort of stuff. That is why Mahan was so interested in naval supremacy, by having decisive battles, by bringing your entire force there, beating them up, and then being able to splinter, because naval supremacy is now secured, and they can all do different missions. I want that to be represented here, but that aside, basically, admirals work much like generals, which also means when I build a naval base and a general picks up the boats from that naval base and I send them on a mission, similar to if I send the lads from Yorkshire on a mission in Singapore, I send them on a mission in, for example, the Pacific. And that is largely realistic. In an edge case, unrealistic. I want to bring that up because it's very important to me, because I really was sort of hoping for this edge case to be represented, but basically, most naval powers at the time, if almost all powers at the time, were building, constructing, repairing, and so on their ships in their actual homelands. That is where their naval industry was, where they had the capabilities to do this. A notable exception, because of the huge scale of the empire, because of the huge scale of the potential of the empire to crumble if they can't protect it, was the United Kingdom, or well, Great Britain at the time. What am I suggesting here? Basically, if we look at the Pacific Ocean, it's a big location, and it's very difficult to take control of unless, you have control of the Panama Canal, for example, that sort of stuff. So what they did was, they went to British Columbia, and they constructed a port there. That port became a naval base, and that's nice. That's, hey, it basically just means supply, which isn't that dedicated. But then in the 60s and 70s, they also created an actual dock right there. You can repair, you can build, etc. ships in this location. And what I was hoping for was basically the idea, and you're going to see that this isn't the case here, but I was hoping for the idea that if I have a navy that was built, of course, let's say in Manchester, the Admiral takes them, I say, Admiral, your mission is in the Pacific. And then they have some sort of troublesome situation, they are damaged, they need to be repaired, that they don't go all the way back to where they were built, but go to the next best dockyard, which in this case would be in British Columbia. That's what they historically did. Right, that is historically how that went. It is an exception, Germany was unable to actually have anything like that in Qingdao any of its other colonies in Africa, for example. So this is an exception. It is not depicted. Basically, if you lose a battle, you will go home to where these ships are made, so your actual naval base, or yeah, where these ships are harbored, similar to how battalions are harbored there, right? And then they will regroup right there, basically. It will take time, etc. I was just really thinking, if I'm active in the Pacific and I get beaten up, you know, I wish you didn't go all over the globe. I wish you just went to where it actually makes sense. But the result, ultimately, for this system wouldn't be that different gameplay-wise, because ultimately it would also just mean your ships currently are out of commission. Your ships currently can't be used because they are in a port. Ultimately, as much as I would like this to actually build up, you know, naval bases in Australia, for example, in British Columbia and whatnot, to have a dominance in the Eastern and the Western Pacific, I will say, I do feel like it's probably a longer time frame to have to go back to all the way to England, but like it's the same principle of I was defeated, I'm out of action right now, the enemy has temporary or maybe even permanent naval supremacy. So I want to complain about this because I do think it important, but ultimately, I will say I get it, I think. Now, let's continue. Sorry for this off-topic thing. Well, it wasn't off-topic. I do just want to say that it's not in. If you were looking for something like this, that's not the case. At least from the way I read this, you basically build your navy somewhere, and then from somewhere they go on missions, and if they need repair, if they are not on a mission, they go back to where they were. They don't go to, for example, British Columbia's naval dockyard. Admirals are the interface to your navies. Admirals are given orders, you know, what I just said, missions, which they attempt to carry out to the best of their ability using the flotillas they have been assigned to. These orders consist of intercept any hostile navies around a certain strategic region's friendly coastlines while keeping your fleet stationed close to the shore. For example, Iberia is a strategic region. England is a strategic region, and then we have Ireland and Scotland together with Iceland and Greenland as North Sea as a strategic region. So that is intercept. It focuses on a fairly small area there, right? It's fairly small. We have patrol, any shipping lanes between the Admiral's home region and a remote region, intercepting any hostile navies encountered. So basically, if I have somebody stationed right here, you know, in Iberia, and I say, hey, I need you to secure the shipping lane all the way to Angola, he would be like, okay, I'll check every node. I'll make sure nothing's going on here, right? This, of course, is much less concentrated, is a much more divided task. It's a difficult task, but it's an important task, because to find somebody that is raiding your supply lines, you need to find them. And as stupid as that sounds, it's not easy to find someone on the sea. So basically, yeah, that's what this is. Of course, it would be even more difficult to find somebody here compared to, you know, closer to the coast right there. Now, convoy raid is what we just talked about. At a particular point at sea to damage enemy shipping lanes. So this, basically, convoy raiding happens right here. But the enemy is like, I'm not sure. I need to find exactly where they are, which makes sense, by the way. I do want to point that out. They could be raiding you here today, and then tomorrow they could be here, you know, like that's the idea. You need to find them, so you are sent out into this mission to trace the entire location and try to find out where it is. So basically, this is something that will take its time, and convoy raiding is very precise. You say, all of the convoys that are enemies and pass through here, we can take them. I'm very curious. It doesn't say anything here. You know how I am. If they implemented it, they would probably be telling us, because it's an exciting feature. But I am curious whether there's, for example, a law or like a doctrine in which I can sink neutral convoys but be more efficient in my general convoy raiding. Think about Lusitania, for example, that, you know, sparked the United States of America getting very angry at Germany in World War I. Now, I don't know where that's in, but I just did want to bring it up. Naval invasions is the fourth option here, to establish a beachhead and a front line on enemy soil by escorting and protecting generals' land forces in a joint operation. Basically, you tell a general, open a new front over there, then the general says, okay, I need a navy, and then the navy comes and says, boom, we gotcha. And then you box in there, and then afterwards the general, of course, needs to be supplied. We're going to see that in more detail later. While it has not yet made its way into the game, we also want to add a fifth order, blockade, to disable enemy ports and prevent hostile forces from crossing straits. An artistic mock-up of an admiral in the navy panel. First of all, we really, really need blockade, in my opinion. We really do need it, so please do implement that before the game releases. But yeah, I mean, the missions that we have are vague, but they're not actually that vague. What I mean is they're generalist missions, but they do both describe and result in exactly what the navies were tasked with doing. That is very, very adequate. That is very, very adequate. We have Dionisio Ruiz right here. He's intercepting in the Iberia HQ. So basically, in this location, he's intercepting right over there along the coastline. He is charismatic and naval commander. He is intelligentsia, I believe. I think this may be his rank or just the size of his flotilla, not sure. They have normal attrition because they are active, of course, so they do need maintenance every now and again. They are intercepting right now, then this means likely patrol. This could mean naval invasion? Or could it be convoy raid? I feel like this could be convoy raid because, like, that's a harbor, right? That's a port. And if you do a naval invasion, you need a port. You're securing a port. So I assume this is it, and that this is just raiding. The interface is fine. That's really all I can say about it. Convoy raid and naval invasion are aggressive orders intended to hurt the enemy in different ways, while intercept and patrol are defensive orders that counter the other two. We have to start by to understand what's going on, we have to start by talking about shipping lanes and the supply network. Shipping lanes are facilitated by vessels called convoys, which are an output of port buildings. So we have naval bases, and we have port buildings so far. Naval bases actually create your fleet. Port buildings create automatic convoys, so basically your merchant fleet and commercial activity in general. These are created automatically whenever it's necessary to move goods and or people overseas. So these are these are done automatically. I am not sure about this one, by which I mean that, and you're going to see that in a second, if I am undersupplying my empire in terms of convoys, my entire empire's network will suffer, and I don't think that's adequate. I think shipping industries have priorities. Getting tools into China so that I can industrialize is more important than getting diamonds, right? But technically both of these imports would suffer if I don't have enough convoys. I wish we could set priorities here. I will tell you right now, I do think this being done generally automatically is a good idea because otherwise it's just a super tedious and unnecessary task. Now, the three main reasons this happens are due to naval trade routes between non-adjacent markets, so from China to Japan and whatnot, you know, whatever you have as a trade deal. Remote states connecting to their market, so for example, this state connecting to Portugal, which is their market. And battalions sent to front lines that can only be supplied by ships. So if I, as Portugal, invade Sokoto, I need to have a supply line right here for Sokoto. This does exactly what it must do. That is how navies work. That is what navies do, right? So makes perfect sense to me. When you create a new shipping lane that would create and need convoys, they are warned of how many new convoys would be required for this action, which is based on the size of the route or the army supplied. So how many goods are you transporting, how many troops do you need to supply, and so on and so forth. Honestly, very sensible. This is a very sensible solution. You could have this in a very extravagant, in a very manual way with a lot of stuff. I really only want prioritization. I think the automatic building of convoys is a good idea. I think what convoys do, where convoys come in, is very, very reasonable. But yeah, if possible, I would like to set some prioritization. As it stands, I do think the Irish potato famine can happen, but it is less likely because the entire network would have to suffer for Ireland being unable to import food when they require it, right? Historically speaking, the Westminster was of the opinion, whether it, I don't want to talk about the intention here, whether it is like intentional deaths, of course, or whether it is some negligence. Don't want to debate that, not a topic here. What I do want to say is, they historically were of the opinion that no more are needed, no more convoys are needed. But if your entire empire suffers, I feel like you always will lean towards building more convoys, making it less likely that Ireland could be undersupplied. And that is just one of the examples. There were, of course, many, many other famines in this sort of period. But since the entire network will always suffer, it feels like you kind of always want to expand because, like, hey, yeah, I might not care about X and Y, but I will care about things reaching my market capital because that's where the rebellion could happen. So, yeah, I wish some prioritization could happen. At the very least. Shipping lanes are always established via the shortest possible path, that's fair enough, as defined by the number of nodes in the naval network it passes through. A zoomed out view of the North Angolan shoreline above showing the main route ships travel off the coast of Southwest Africa, I think, right? Yeah. The yellow pin indicates this path is part of Portugal's supply network. You can see it right here, so basically, This means, right on the left there, means that that is part of our supply network. We're actively doing something within this, and as you can see, our ship is going there. It's a nice little image. I like this nice little ship. It's much more in context. It reminds me actually of Rome Total War 1's shipping lanes. They were so tiny and nice as well. The sum total of a country's shipping lanes determine the extent of its supply network, and the total cost in convoys, and that network compared to the convoy output by ports determine the overall strength of the network. That is to say, if the total shipping lane cost is 500 convoys, but ports provide only 400, the supply network as a whole will operate at only 80% efficiency. I am not the biggest fan. This impacts all shipping lanes, causing less trade to flow between the markets than would be optimal and impacting the supply and morale of overseas troops. I am not the biggest fan. I think I get this from a gameplay point of view. If it impacts the entire network, you could argue that the merchant fleet basically says, oh, we need to like distribute our forces as good as we can, but do it equally. Okay, you can argue this. I don't think it's realistic, because I do think they would set priorities. It's more important to bring things to London than it is to supply your colony, I don't know, in the middle of nowhere, in Micronesia, right? I do also think that I get it from a gameplay point of view, however, as much as I just criticize it there, I think I do get it, because if you can just cut off locations, the player like can make very simple mistakes that are just kind of stupid, because, you know, in the real world it wouldn't happen. But more importantly, probably, the player would just like ignore it 90% of the time. You know, listen, if I can just be like, oh yeah, just don't give anything to the nerds over there, I kind of just ignore it, right? And London will be like, yeah, we're happy. Our empire's crumbling and everything is terrible, but we are getting what we need. So I kind of get it, but I really wish we had some sort of prioritization so that, like, the penalty didn't necessarily apply to everything. I don't know how to feel about this. It's just not... Yeah, I think there are prioritizations no matter how we look at it, basically, right? Admirals assigned to convoy raid a given sea node will surreptitiously try to sink any enemy transports that pass through. In effect, this will do damage over time to the affected shipping lanes, causing both an overall drop in efficiency of the affected country's supply network, so here's the overall drop again, but here comes the good part, but also a larger local drop in efficiency of the damaged shipping lanes. Big fan. This is actually localized. If I raid Portugal right here, it will impact both this lane. First of all, it will impact the entire network, but then it will impact this lane, and that lane, and that lane. Good stuff. That's good stuff. I like that. I really like that. The local impact there is big to me. I just wish it was like, you know, like I could set like a localized thing as well. On my end, you know, as Portugal here. Now, as a result, by parking your fleet in a highly trafficked part of the ocean and raiding, you could do a lot of damage to your enemy's trade, or even directly impact the amount of military supplies they're able to send to their front lines. Yeah, this is a big one. If I have some ships, or if Sokoto has a friend that has ships, and Portugal wants to invade Sokoto, then Sokoto could say, okay, please, can you stop them from doing this, right, by raiding the nodes here? Then their armies might be destroyed by Sokoto. I like this idea. This is a really good idea. This is a straightforward, very directly interactable and understandable mechanic of supply that will be very impactful, at least if the numbers are tweaked correctly. Of course, balancing is a different topic, but I hope you know where I'm coming from there. I think this is a really neat and simple implementation. Rather, it is easy to understand and execute, and then it has a big impact. That is how it should be. There is complexity in there because you need to choose when to raid where and whatnot. That's also a big question. There are so many questions about this, like, that aren't answered in this dev diary. For example, the question to me, a big question is, you have intercept, right, which is along a strategic zone. Then you have patrol, which is just along the entire route. If I raid you right here, do you know I'm raiding you here, or do you see they're raiding our supply line here, right? Because if you know where exactly it is, and you have anything close, I believe, is this Portugal right here? No, that's, but let's say Dahomey, I think it's Dahomey, right, was held by Portugal. Couldn't they just, like, I don't need to patrol and, like, take time until I find you and snuff you out. I can just say intercept, I'll get you, like, in a month, and you're done, right? I would like some uncertainty there. I'll just be honest with you. A navy that is raiding this node, yes, it is raiding this node, but it could be here, it could be there, it could be, you know, like, there are many options, there are many possibilities. If they can immediately snuff me out by intercepting, I feel like they would add, like, really meaningless micro, where I start raiding here. Then they are like, oh, I need to schedule an interception mission. So they do an interception mission, it takes like a month to get there. I know this, so I'm like, alright, I'm gonna raid here now. You know what I mean? Like, I hope that they can't quite tell, so that I, as the convoy raider, don't have to micro. I just know eventually they're gonna find me, and that they don't have to micro. Because otherwise they just have to like go and you know, basically keep intercepting in different places, unless they actually do want to wait for the patrol. That is something I'm thinking about. But I will also tell you, as much as I have a concern there, we just don't have enough information. I wish I could interpret this more freely, you know, wider, but I really, really can't. But yeah, this is Portugal's supply network. You can see they have the trade route right here to Angola. They have one to Mozambique. Then they have one to Goa. I believe to Goa, right? And then they have one to China, where they trade for porcelain, and you could interrupt right here. This would interrupt China. This would interrupt the trade with India and China. This would interrupt, right here would interrupt China, India, and Africa. And if you do it right here, even the way to the Azores would be interrupted. So this is literally everything. This is right in front of their doorstep, meaning that they can react to you much, much faster as well. But more on that in a second. Now let's move on. Admirals assigned to patrol a certain stretch of their supply network will eventually be able to detect and engage the raiding navy. That's what we talked about, right? So patrolling is that you go down the nodes, causing a naval battle to ensue, which will not only sink ship, but also send the losing side back to base for repairs for some time. The fundamental idea of what this means is you are being out of the terrain here. This means the other side, at least temporarily, will have naval supremacy. The effect this has is really good, because that's how it is. I will say I was hoping that we would have a solution that covers the edge case of, for example, Great Britain. What do I mean? Usually it is correct. France, Germany, Spain, Russia, they had very few designated naval bases capable of actually taking care of their ships. If they get hurt, they need to get to one of the major ones, and that is the way it is. 99%, they were never in colonies. 99%, or maybe 100%, I just didn't find one in these countries yet, but basically, they had to return the ships that were damaged to the actual naval bases that were already building them, because those are the only ones capable of doing it. But there's an edge case here, and that is Great Britain. Great Britain had in British Columbia, they had the Pacific Station. Pacific Station means that is basically just an admiral or rear admiral sitting there and being like, I command some ships that are here in the Pacific. Those ships are on a mission. Sometimes these ships will be like, go back, you know, they will go to other theaters, basically much like battalions are deployed, right? But in general, they had the mission overseeing there. And they also, since the Pacific and British Columbia are admittedly incredibly disconnected from Britain, from the Atlantic, from anything right there, right? They basically built up the British Columbian naval base where the planning went. They built that up to an actual dockyard. If you had to do maintenance, if you had damages on your ship in British Columbia, in the Pacific, you could bring it to there rather than go literally either around Africa and then to Britain, or go all the way around South America and then to Britain, right? They could do that in British Columbia. This is not simulated in the system. The effect is still acceptable, which is why I'm not too agitated by this, because what it means to lose a battle and to need maintenance is I am out of the fight for the moment. I will be back, but I must be repaired. I just wish there was like some additional strategy. It's not possible in this system, clearly, because admirals are bound, much like generals are bound to their barracks in their strategic region, they're bound to that. But I would really like it if I could build this British Columbia base, if I could build a base in Australia, if I really had the funds to build it up, so that I have a shorter way after losing. There's a huge difference if you lose against Japan in a naval battle and your fleet needs to return to Britain, compared to having a naval base in which these ships are not built, but they can be repaired in, if they return to British Columbia instead. There's a huge difference in time and when they can come back. And that would add, on Japan's side, for example, a huge proponent or component here as well, because it would make it viable and probably desirable for Japan to basically destroy that port. And say, or to destroy that naval base in British Columbia and say, not like this. We will take this down, you will have to resupply, you will have to, you know, repair yourself in another port, in your home port. Would be huge. It's not in. I really wish it was. On that note, I do want to mention as well that, like, it does appear to me, basically, I'm Portugal, again, right? I'm in the Iberian region, I build my ships there in my naval bases, and I have an admiral there. If I send that admiral to, you know, for example, convoy raid in the Bering Strait, the Bering Sea, I haven't seen anything here that would deny me this. but it is kind of odd. Mahan was the most influential, I think, naval thinker, basically, when it comes to this topic. He had the doctrine of the decisive battle, of course, but the decisive battle itself, you know, where you destroy the enemy's navy capabilities of doing anything, doesn't exist for the sake of doing this. It exists so that afterwards you have naval supremacy, like we discussed earlier with the temporary naval supremacy, and can raid, can protect your convoys, etc., 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 right? So that is why he said that. And he made a plan in, I believe, 1890, a contingency plan in case the US and Great Britain would go to war. And basically what he was saying was, if we get a chance, and this is me really like simplifying it because there's much more to it, of course, but if we get a chance in which our navy can get active on a large scale because, for example, the Great British or the British have committed their navy to a different port in Florida or in Texas or whatever, what we need to do is we need to assault their coaling stations, basically refueling stations in Nova Scotia. If we hit those, the British fleet, as mighty as it might be, they can't reasonably be on an operation here and resupply. And if they can't do that, we win. We have naval supremacy without even fighting, without this decisive battle, right? And I'm sort of missing this because they're clearly like, they are based in Britain, no matter what. They are supplied from Britain, no matter what. And I think at least, I mean, I didn't see any restrictions in this dev diary, and we still have a bunch of dev diary to go, basically, but I didn't see anything like, you know, where convoy raiding is limited. Maybe it is limited, like distance-wise, because I'm looking at this and I'm like, man, it would be another layer of strategy if I could literally stop them from operating where we are. If I raid their refueling stations in Nova Scotia, what are they going to do? Their ships can't reach us. In the medieval period, we had a very similar situation, actually, where if you controlled Cyprus, if you controlled the Holy Land, you would be the only one that can actually go over here to the Byzantine Empire. This is why the Arabs, so the Muslim Caliphate, when they invaded, why they so desperately needed this. The range on ships was way smaller, of course. They followed the coastline exclusively. They didn't sail in the winter here in the Mediterranean Sea. It was too dangerous. They didn't have a compass until the 14th century. It was a wild time back then in medieval Europe in general. But what I'm saying is, if you deny them this strip, for example, Egypt can't damage anything here that is the center of the East Roman Empire, right? This is why Salah ad-Din was so angry and was so agitated by the idea of the Crusaders holding this. He was there when the Crusaders, now in control of the Holy Land and in supply range of the Nile Delta, he was there when they invaded. He fended them off as just a commander, as a smaller commander. And that made it very clear to him he needs to take control of this, or otherwise they have a chance of always breaching into the heartland of Muslim Egypt. And I would love to see something very similar, you know, for saying, for example, obviously I can interrupt your supply and I can stop your land warfare with that, but you know, I haven't seen a mention, basically, of the idea of saying, Portugal, I'm just going to take away a supply station. It's just gone. The supply in general seems to be abstracted, basically, to convoys. If I need convoys, I can run them as long as I have the number of convoys, right? And it's fair enough. It's a fine abstraction, in the sense that it certainly works. We can see it right here. We have available convoys 2,000, required convoys 2,100, because there are 21 sea nodes employed here, and the supply network strength is 95%. But again, I will say, I do think there is a difference whether you can do a military, you know, task with your navy if you don't have coaling stations at your disposal. But there doesn't seem to be a mission like that at all. Basically, you raid convoys, you patrol convoy lines, you intercept and whatnot. You always, basically, you have an impact, but it runs out to a fight. To not have a navy somewhere, it seems as though you must fight and defeat them, then they retreat. I would like it if I could cut out a navy, basically, out of a theater by destroying their supply line. Again, I will die on this hill. I stand with this idea that this should play a role, but the effect that this system has as it is actually sufficient. I want to make that clear as well. I think the way this works simulates perfectly that if you win your first strike against a smaller navy because Britain underestimated how many fleets you would bring, you have temporary naval supremacy. The old ones go repair, maybe new ones can come in, but they take their time, right? So this principle of achieving the supremacy still exists. It just comes from away from a path that isn't, like, you know, what they historically anticipated. But again, if it works, it works. I just wanted to bring it up because I do think it is an aspect that I'm sort of missing here. Now, Admirals assigned to patrol a certain stretch of the supply network will eventually be able to detect and engage the raiding navy. So, for example, if I raid right here, the Portuguese, they're like, oh, where exactly are they? Ah, I found you, son of a gun. Causing a naval battle to ensue, which will not only sink ships, but also send the losing side back to base for repairs for some time. Did I already read this? Let's just continue. Admirals assigned to intercept all nodes along the coastline are able to do the same to any raiders along the coast. Convoy raiding right outside a major entry-exit port, such as in the English Channel, therefore has the chance to seriously disrupt a large number of shipping lanes, but also puts you at greater risk of detection and interception than if you're raiding transatlantic shipping lanes on the deep seas. Makes sense. The composition of your navy can also greatly impact how this plays out. A fleet with an accompaniment of submarines can deal more damage before being intercepted, while a fleet of monitors has an easier time intercepting raiders, but may be more easily sunk if faced down by a more powerful navy. Basically, depending on who your admiral is, depending on what ships they have, they, will like build up a tick. I'm this close to finding them, and then boom, we engage them. I think that is basically how it is. Because the distance admirals must patrol plays a difference, there's an inherent asymmetry to convoy raiding and patrol orders. Since a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, the damage done to a shipping lane by raiders is the same whether it stretches across one node or 10. I have a fleet, I could have that same fleet raid in multiple nodes if I split it up, right? Or I can have them raid in one node, it doesn't matter. I intercept the node right there. Whereas 10 times as many flotillas are needed to protect the longer route as effectively as the shorter, because you need to find them, right? You need to find where they are. It makes sense. This is completely sensible. Extremely unfinished breakdown of what is currently happening in the Macaronesian Sea. Look at all those juicy raiding targets. So this is right here next to Morocco, I believe. The interesting thing here to me is, and you will notice that this is a trend. I have a lot of questions, and I have a lot of I wish it was different, but also it works the way it is, so I'm fine. I just wanted to bring it up. I like that I can only see Commander Albert Ashton is tracing supply. I wonder how much I actually see if I click on him. Do I see his entire fleet? Do I not see his entire fleet? Do I see his talents? Do I see how many ships at least he commands? Do I see the ship types, right? That is important, because bringing uncertainty into this is key. Naval warfare fundamentally lives and dies with you committing a guess of what you need to succeed with your mission in this area. If you commit the wrong size, that can happen. If the enemy commits a much larger size than you anticipated, you might be grilled. If you commit a much larger size than they anticipated, they might be grilled. This is important. I would prefer it. Frontlines, we saw that. In Frontlines, we had absolute numbers. We always saw how many were there, what generals were there, what their plan was, etc. If we just get this sort of vague thing, and then Albert Ashton can command up to 10 units, right? That sort of stuff, I would like that, actually, because that brings uncertainty and makes it so that naval warfare is a bit of a guessing game. And it really is. It really is a guessing game. You need to hope that, you will actually succeed. What I'm also wondering is, so what we can see is, obviously, supply network is for their internal market, then we have import, we even down here we have export, so Venezuela is exporting sugar to the Russian market, and then Sardinia-Piedmont are exporting tools to the Chinese market, and this to me seems to suggest that basically looking at a situation where if it is Sardinia-Piedmont that exports something to China, I have to wonder, can I raid that? Yes, if I'm an enemy of China, I'm an enemy of China, and this goes to China, so that's bad. But can I raid that? It's supplies that go to China, but it's not Chinese ships, right? I would like to see maybe a doctrine, a staff academy, of course, similar to what I suggested for land warfare. I would like to see that, or just laws, right? Because this played a big role in World War I. Think of the Lusitania. But yeah, basically, so this view, I do think it is very tough to read. But I have so many questions about how vague it is, whether it is vague. I have so many questions about whether, I can raid neutral targets. Great Britain, for example, very interesting as well. They weren't at war with Brazil. But since Great Britain said the transatlantic slave trade is over, and I said so, and you can't do anything about it, they would routinely raid and destroy Brazilian, not necessarily state-owned, but basically Brazilian convoys transporting slaves from Africa to Brazil. And that is an interesting option. What if I say tea is illegal now? Oh, sorry, Great Britain. There's no tea. It's over. If we're not at war, could I still, basically like a continental system akin to Napoleon's one? That would be interesting. Now, I don't think this is in, because if it were, they'd probably talk about it. They love talking about features. Everybody does, right? But I will say, the system that we have when it comes to warfare has a really good way of coming to results, or at least it seems that way. Obviously, I don't know, but you know, from what we have here, the balance is always different. But it seems to have a really good way to achieve the results that were completely sensible in this situation. And that is a good base framework. That is a good base framework. This system does what it does to determine whether your empire will fall or rise. I want to know about the details, you know? Can I neutral stuff? What about neutral rating? What about forbidding transfer of something even if we're not at war? Oof. I would love information on that. Anyway, let's move on here. Naval invasion is the last one that we have right here. Is an order you give to provide naval support for a general's landing on an enemy coastline. The size of the fleet determines two things. One, how great is the chance that you'll be able to defeat an opponent's intercepting fleet, should there be one. And two, how many battalions will you be able to successfully land? A naval invasion with a very small fleet might land too weak of an initial force to withstand the enemy's counter-offensive before the rest of the army can arrive. Of course, you would bring in, for example, let's say 2 units first, and then you would go back and bring in more. And if you can't do that because the 2 were too small and were already defeated, then the naval invasion fails. Very sensible. This is a good system, in my opinion. Since naval invasion is a one-time order, once it has been completed, it automatically turns into a patrol order to protect the shipping lane, supplying the new front. I almost fell from my chair there. Yeah, no, I like this. Straight up, this is a good system. This is a great system. I like it. I like this concept art a lot as well. Very cute concept art. Right here, look at that. That's Russia. Yeah, that's a Russian boat, isn't it? I'm not sure about this one. Oh, wait, isn't it also Russia? Now I'm so confused. I thought this was the Russian naval ensign, right? Who knows? Maybe it's Scotland. Wrong colors, but don't worry. Navies are made up of flotillas, which are constructed and maintained by naval bases, so much like barracks. Naturally, these can only be built on coastlines where they consume military vessels, such as man-o'-wars or ironclads constructed in shipyards. Shipyards produce, much like ammunition and small arms for the barracks, shipyards produce the ships for the naval base, and the naval base has a production method of what ships they require. Ports, which is the third building, so we have ports, shipyards, and naval bases. Ports do the convoys, right? That's what the system is. They also employ servicemen and officers' pops, so the naval bases, and depending on your navy configuration, may need to consume other military goods as well, such as ammunition and radios, in order to keep in fighting condition. Makes sense. Constructing a competitive navy is not something you can begin considering when your rival has already started saber rattling. It's a long-term investment. It's a costly long-term investment. Another difference between battalions and flotillas is that your country's navy is always considered to be in fully active service. In peacetime, generals can keep their troops on low alert, limiting their consumption and expenses. Once war breaks out, generals can be selectively mobilized to only deploy the troops necessary. Admirals, on the other hand, have exorbitant needs and expenses, even while at peace. So sizing and tacking your navy appropriately is an important consideration for imperialists on a tight budget. Super interesting. Is there still a difference between being on a mission and not being on a mission? And if there is a difference, should I still basically have my navy out even at peace? It's frustrating to me that there doesn't appear to be any mission for peacetime, because again, you could do surveys. The British did that a lot. You could do naval, basically forbid certain goods, slaves, whatever else to pass. You could, so many options. You could intimidate somebody. If I start a diplomatic play against Japan and say, open your market, do you think they will listen to me if my navy is at their border? Or do you think they will listen to me if I'm just I mobilize 15 troops, but my navies are close to Africa? You know what I mean? That is something that I'm missing. Most of the other things I was I'm fine with this not being in because the result is still the same, even though the way may differ. But this one, I'm I would like some naval engagements or naval missions in the peace period, especially for diplomatic plays, of course, as intimidation, that sort of stuff. As provocation, think about World War I, the Ottomans in Russia. Ottoman was pulled into the war. Let's just be honest about this, by a naval engagement right there. Yeah, I would like to see that, but I also, again, I do think, thinking about it, I do think you probably want your navy out as you play the game, even if you are at peace, because if they already have a mission, if they are already in a certain location, it surely would take them less time to then actually engage in something if there's war, or to go somewhere if there's war, if they are already close by. So if I already designate, they are built in, let's say, Yorkshire, whatever the hell, yeah, it doesn't matter. And then I tell them, you will be close to British Columbia. You will basically intercept right there. And then the US say, we are going to war, screw you, Great Britain. I already have them there, right? So if I change that into patrol from there on out, or into naval invasion preparation, which would be insane, by the way, because invading on the Pacific coast, that's nonsense. But you know where I'm coming from there, right? There probably would be a benefit of having your navy out, even if you're at peace. Why is this important to me? This is important because if I don't need to have my navy out, and then a war starts, why wouldn't I just send my entire navy to that guy? You know, to Sokoto? Just beat him up with 1,500 ships? Why not? Where else are they gonna be? They only give me prestige. They don't have anything to do. But if they need to be somewhere and then give me an edge by already being there, by intimidating people in Diplo place, or by, for example, being more easily available for wars, that could be an intimidating factor. Of course, the cost factor plays a role, but yeah, hey, just some things. They sadly don't answer them here. So I just wanted to bring them up. That is something that I would like to see. On the other hand, navies provide you with considerable power projection. That's the number for your prestige, which confers substantial prestige onto your country. Having a world-class navy is not strictly a requirement to be a great power, particularly if you're a large self-sustaining terrestrial empire, but it definitely helps you both gain and hold onto the title. I get that. This makes sense. Yeah, it was respected. It was necessary to maintain that empire. But again, I will say, you know, like, there was more to it, even at peacetime. Artistic mock-up of the Navy panel with flotillas expanded. Admiral Alvarez de Toledo commands 20 flotillas of men of wars on a patrol mission to secure an important Spanish shipping lane. Patrolling in Iberia HQ, he is direct, reckless, a traditionalist admiral, expert naval commander. Traditionalist admiral. Could there be doctrines? Could there be something like that? He's a religious. I believe he actually has a trade. Wait, what? Oh, wow. And then he is a tier 2 admiral. Yeah, here you can see it. And I believe this means this is his flotilla. So, men of war. I believe no submarines, no... I didn't see that before. Is that an aircraft carrier? No aircraft carriers. All right. And then this, I'm not sure what it means. It could mean something like additional like officers or something to like have better quality. Then we have the Monitor Magnanime. You can see it right here. You have basically the attack and the defense value. That is perfectly fine. Like that's just a normal interface right there. Yeah, no, not a bad interface at all. I think very interested again in how the navy is constructed, how much info you have on other navies, because that for me means a lot in relation to how it actually plays. Look at Gibraltar right there. Yeah, I'm not sure whether you can blockade the node. Interesting. Anyway, before we wrap up for this week, I want to say a few words about the lack of an order to just seek out and destroy enemy forces. In Victoria 3, your commanders, generals, as well as admirals are given strategic objectives, which they use their manpower and resources to carry out as best as they can. Basically, when you go out and are a navy, when you go out and you are a general, you have a mission. Battles, be that land or sea, happen and are important. But your mission is grander than the battle. That's basically where they came from here, where Lacek came from here. I think it's a really, really valid point. Honestly, I don't even feel like these paragraphs are necessary, because it's just like this is such an uncontroversial evolutionary system in my opinion. Like it makes perfect sense. As much as I'm like I have additional ideas that are maybe stupid and maybe way out there, but like, you know, as much as I'm like that, it's like, yeah, this is like the evolution of Hearts of Iron 4 and EU4, right? The optimal choice would then be to assign this order right. So basically, if in this process they get into conflict with the enemy forces, as they almost certainly will, a battle will ensue. The outcome of that battle determines which direction the war proceeds in. The intent of this is to remove the need to babysit your commander. So since you can't just say do a battle, you don't need to afterwards go do another battle or somebody else to battle. No, you go, here's a strategic position, try to convoy raid, etc, right? So, reasonable. The optimal choice would then be to assign this order only to the strongest commander, fight the eventual battle, then revoke the order and give it to another commander. Yeah, makes sense. While an order like Advanced Front instead, the general's intention is simply to capture territory as efficiently as possible, ideally while avoiding enemy interference. If it's possible to avoid the enemy, the imperative is to try to be intercepted by as weak of an enemy force as possible. Meanwhile, the intent behind Defend Front, so warfare, land warfare is what we're talking about here, is the opposite. Prevent enemy incursions by defending it in the places where the enemy might advance, bringing to bear as powerful a force as possible. Similarly, at sea, convoy raiding is about maximizing shipping lane damage while avoiding detection, while patrol is about minimizing damage to convoys by seeking out and destroying those enemy ships attacking them, not to sink ships for his own sake. Really important point. Even Mahan, the most important theory writer of this period, was not a fan of the decisive battle for the sake of the decisive battle. For him, it basically stated, if you have an overarching mission, make sure that you will destroy your enemy whenever you meet him during this mission, because then you have supremacy. then you have Britannia rules the waves. Well, in his case, America rules the waves. But that is the idea, and that is, yeah, makes perfect sense, right? So that is also the approach that the game takes. I personally very much approve of this. Depending on how the war is developing, your priorities or overall strategy might certainly shift, causing you to change the orders you've assigned or make changes in your ranks to distribute resources differently. But our design intent is that this should only be necessary because your strategy is evolving, not to counter enemy movements or try to min-max your way to victory. Fair enough. Naval and aerial warfare in strategy games commonly face the design challenge of extreme mobility options due to the lack of obstacles to movement. There's no terrain, it's just water or it's just air. Usually some form of fog of war and interception radius mechanics is employed to counteract turtling behavior. The AI also often has to be forced to make mistakes to not become too good at dodging or intercepting the player in this environment. Yeah, you can even do this in... You see this in CK3. People laugh at this, but it's like... I've heard this discussion, but it's like... If you played CK3 against the perfect AI, which isn't that difficult because it basically just says, never take any fights that you will lose, only take fights that you will win, bait them around so that they won't finish sieging, all that sort of stuff. If you fought that AI, it would suck. And they basically are stopping that here by, even with Victoria 3's more strategical level decision making, the freedom of movement the sea provides will make a system where avoiding being in the same location as the enemy so as to not start a battle extremely micro heavy, annoying and highly unfair to either human or AI players depending on implementation. Yeah, that's why we do not focus on the battle. We just know the battle will happen if there is somebody opposing us in our mission. That's why they do it. There is no micro there. It's a strategic choice. So instead, in Victoria 3, you tell your admirals what their overall priorities should be for the war, and then they try to do that using the resources they've been allocated, only coming into conflict when they become aware of an enemy admiral with an order that clashes with their own. Right. That's this Dev Diary. Damn, 51 minutes. I really thought it would be shorter. Roughly 51 anyway. Next week, economic impacts of warfare in Victoria 3. I'm excited for that. Seems like we are actually leaving the first batch of diaries on the military system already. I wonder what comes afterwards. I really hope trade, because a lot of what we saw here is connected to trade. And yet we know nothing. Nothing in detail anyway. This was me today. I said a lot of things where I'm like, I wish they had taken a different angle, but the outcome is the same. I said some stuff where I said, I think this should be a bigger factor. Here we are. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you later. Alligator.